You're looking at live pictures here from New York City at Kennedy Airport. You're going to see pretty shortly President Trump for the first time coming back to his home city. And if you heard him today from Capitol Hill, right outside at the press conference, he believes he's coming home a conquering hero with the passage of health care, at least as it relates with the House. We'll see where it goes from there. Okay, so you remember, I'm sure, I don't know, 60 some odd, maybe 70 votes to repeal Obamacare in the House that went really nowhere. And Republicans rightfully trashed Democrats and Obamacare for not reading the bill before they voted on it. They jumped on then Speaker Nancy Pelosi when she said this.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it away from the fog of the controversy.
As you'd expect, Paul Ryan didn't exactly buy that line of thinking. Here's what he had to say then.
I don't think we should pass bills that we haven't read, that we don't know what they cost. I mean, I don't think that's being effusive.
All right, now let's fast forward to today and House Speaker Paul Ryan. He ran through a bill without knowing the cost. Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office hasn't even scored the bill. Plus, there were so many last-minute changes, lawmakers didn't have time to read it. Going back to 2010, Republicans also criticized Democrats for passing a major piece of legislation without any support from the other side. Well, today, the Grand Old Party did exactly the same thing. Now it heads to the Senate, and it could be an uphill climb when they get there. Here's what Republican South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham has to say about it. Quote, "Any bill that has been posted less than 24 hours, debated 3 or 4 hours, not scored, needs to be viewed with suspicion." Republicans have a narrow 52 to 48 seat majority, as you know, in the Senate, and several Republicans from states that have expanded Medicaid under Obamacare are already voicing their concerns. But GOP Senate leaders have already set up a working group of lawmakers that span the ideological spectrum as they try to avoid the divides that have plagued the House. Let's bring in our panel right now. Couple Richards. Mr. Brodsky, former Democratic New York State Assembly, now a senior fellow at Demos and a professor at NYU. Richard St. Paul, Republican strategist and former vice chair for the National Black Republican Association, also an attorney in his own right. And Andrew, who you've already heard for.
Richard
yes, exactly.
Table.
The only non-Richard, but we won't hold it against you. Okay.
Change your name.
Was this a victory for Republicans today or not?
This was a victory for the president's administration. Look, everybody knew when he was coming into office what he wanted to do. He said, I need to repeal Obamacare and replace it. And he did that today. So that he is about living up to his campaign pledges. Now it has to work its way through the Senate. And I say the Senate Republicans approach this cautiously optimistic. And I say the optimistic part is because all the senators, a few who you just mentioned, say that they believe that Obamacare should be repealed. And I think they're going to find a way to do that and make this bill even better.
Okay, but here is the question. I've said the real perfect scenario for Republicans, as bizarre as this sounds, is it passes the House, but it dies in the Senate. I believe if enacted, what Andrew just laid out for everybody would be politically devastating in red states, in purple states, and in anywhere else where Republicans got to run on what this will do, let alone Republican governors who are going to have to either decide to pull the plug on it or not and face the consequences. To me, the Senate is going to crumble this up. They're not even going to vote on it. They're going to start as if nothing even came from the House and hope magically through reconciliation they're going to get there. I don't see it passing the Senate, and my argument is I don't think Republicans in the Senate want it to pass.
No, they don't. They won't. But whether this constitutes a victory is based upon some arcane notion that keeping a promise, a vague promise, is so important that it outweighs what you did.
But I will take to Richard's point, imagine if today, as they headed home to break, they failed the second time. Failed the second time when the president promised everything. They have to prove they can get something through the House that they run.
District by district. This is not a national, whatever the national numbers are don't matter. But if you're John Faso or you're Peter King, you have as close to sign your own death warrant as possible. Put aside the wonderful coverage that Andrew developed on the actual pre-existing condition stuff. Special ed? Let's remember what special ed is.
Yep.
It's the education of autistic children. It's the education of children with cerebral palsy, and, other health conditions. The most vulnerable people in the world. Say what you want about Obamacare, but you slash money for sick children as part of that bill.
How about rape victims?
No. I'm putting all that aside. I'll leave that to you. I'm saying that when John Faso and Peter King, among others, have to face voters in 2018, this vote will not be a political victory for them. It will be the heart and soul of a campaign that will defeat more of them than it saves.
See, I disagree, because I think that these legislators have taken a great consideration into their votes. Some Republican members voted no, and I think they voted no based upon their constituency. The Republican House district seats are very much gerrymandered, so that, I mean, Fossil does have a little bit of a swing seat, but
Peter
for
King
the
won
main,
with 54% of the vote.
and he won with the majority. So the point of the matter is that most of the incumbents in the House who are Republicans are safe, and I think they've calculated whether or not their district would support them if they support this bill. But we're a long way from this actually passing and becoming law.
It doesn't matter
it
because
doesn't matter
they already own the vote. So John Faso and Peter King and those Republicans in New Jersey who voted yes, they own this. You're going to start seeing protests. You're going to start seeing ads. You're going to start
already
seeing
see that.
organizing immediately.
Town hall meetings, you see Democrats who are upset at town hall meetings, who are
You know,
mad
one
about
thing-
not winning
one
the
thing
election.
I've always found over the years, and I've been surprised by the intensity of it, is voters hate it. I don't care the political party. When they think not only they're getting hustled, but somebody is a hypocrite. And by that I mean, there was a story today in the Salt Lake City Tribune. Somebody says, why the heck are you talking about some Utah newspaper? Congressman Chaffetz was going to leave, had a procedure that maybe, at least the paper believes, he expedited it. Because it would be a pre-existing condition if this thing failed. Yet he voted for this. The congressional health care package for lawmakers and their staffs are different than what they are positing now for the rest of the public. And to me, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to lay what they get versus what they want everybody else to get. And the part of this thing that was crazy to me is employers now. Employers, people, at least in the past, you got what you got. And if you were in the 40, 50 million people that didn't have health insurance, 25 of them or so at least now sign up for this thing. But in the past, if you had health care through your job, that was sacrosanct. Now all of a sudden, it's up for grabs. I think that's nuts.
You mentioned that this bill preserved the distinction between these changes and the congressional health care changes. Do you know what made the final bill, Andrew?
I think they're exempted from these changes.
Well,
I think Congress exempted them.
again, let's just seize on that for a second because it's a good pick. Are you telling me that politically it's a victory to go home and say my health care I preserved, but your health care got cut?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure about whether or not Congress, members of Congress and their staff are going to be susceptible to this piece of legislation. My understanding is from the emails I received from the Republican National Committee is that they are going to be susceptible
Last
to this.
question for
So
you,
this
Richard.
is what
Last question for
Go
you.
ahead.
If at the end of the day, the Senate says this is political suicide, and they put a working group together, I believe there's Democrats who say, you know what, Obamacare ain't imperfect. There's things that we can and should change. If they come out with what Andrew and I were talking about before the program, with some kind of a grand bargain, is there any way in a million years the Freedom Caucus, who made it even more draconian this time around, would ever play ball with a modest improvement to the plan instead of throwing it all out?
Well, I don't think they have a choice. If the Senate comes
They've already
back,
said no once.
if the Senate comes back and says, you know, this is the bill we're passing, and it goes to conference committee where they hammer out the differences, the Freedom Caucus is far removed from that.
They still gotta vote for it.
Vote for it, Richard.
Look, at the end of the day, they will vote for it.
There's an
If
I'm
it
not so
comes
sure.
to the bottom line
Maybe you're
of
right.
passing
I
it,
don't think so.
I know
they
we're
will
heavy, but
vote
there's
for
one
it.
other outside possibility. I think there is a window for a bipartisan compromise. If you can get a Senate group to actually work on improving Obamacare, if the Senate could pass a continuation of Obamacare with changes to it.
Maybe you're right, Andrew, but just how radically different would that piece of legislation be than what got passed late this
and
afternoon?
the president might veto it.
All right, coming up next, FBI Director James Comey makes his second visit to Congress in 2 days. Today, it was House committee's turn to grill him. We're going to tell you why people still buzzing about what he told the Senate committee just yesterday.